Good morning, everybody. Chris Lee and Gavin Schoenwald of Southeastern 14 here, ready to talk SEC football as we do today. We'll probably go a little short of an hour. We start every day at noon. Thank you to our sponsors, CHOMPS and MyPerfectFranchise.net. If you're interested in advertising with us, caroline.smith at Southeastern 14 is the person to reach out to. That's also in the banner below. Should be in the show notes too. But Gavin, welcome back. I know you missed Monday, but you watched a lot of football. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for rejoining us. We're not going to spend the day rewinding Monday because everybody's looking forward to next week. But I want to ask you, you watched a lot of SEC football this last week, and give me some meaningful things that you can take over maybe into this coming weekend where we're starting to have a lot of big games.
Yeah, like you said, man, wasn't able to join yesterday, so missed a little bit of the recap, but still I'd feel remiss if I didn't give a little bit of my thoughts and maybe, how that shaped what this next week looks like. Man, I was super impressed with Kentucky. Ray Davis, explosive offense. Thought they did some great things defensively as well. I thought Tennessee, that environment was exactly what we thought it would be. It was loud. It was raucous. I actually was impressed with the Gamecocks start. I was afraid that if they got behind the eight ball quick that it could kind of roll downhill, but they actually kept it close at the beginning, and Tennessee kind of pulled away as the game went on. Alabama, Milroe is exactly who we thought he was. He's not that elite quarterback, but he's an elite athlete, an elite playmaker, and definitely gives Alabama the best chance to win these games. Ole Miss, thought it was an unbelievable performance offensively, stepped up as well. We got to figure out this LSU defense as well. I think that's some big-time question marks moving forward. And then, with Georgia and Auburn, definitely closer than I thought. Chris, I remember we sat up here and we were laughing, thinking, Auburn may not score 10 points. I think they scored 10 in the first quarter. Yeah. And so, that one definitely caught me by surprise. Brock Bowers is a man amongst boys, super playmaker for those guys. And then, with Arkansas and A&M, I thought it was A&M's most complete game. I thought offensively they looked really solid. Defensively, got a bunch of sacks on KJ Jefferson, pick six as well. And then, special teams, Nia Smith had a big-time punt return as well. So complimentary football, all three phases for A&M, most complete game, setting up a big one against Alabama this weekend.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. I'm going to read you the games first. And I'm going to disqualify Mississippi State and Western Michigan. Western Michigan is awful, so Mississippi State should romp. But your SEC on SEC games this weekend, LSU visiting Missouri, Alabama visiting A&M, Vanderbilt heading to Florida, Kentucky going to Georgia, Arkansas going to Ole Miss. Of those 5 games, which is the one that is the biggest toss-up or the one that you're having the hardest getting a read on?
I would probably say let's start with that 11 o'clock kick of LSU Missouri, because to me, if LSU doesn't get beat this past weekend at Ole Miss, I think that game is a lot more interesting. And now it's kind of like, now I expect Mizzou to win, but LSU's also favored still, and so it's just, I don't know, it's a little bit of a funky game to me. In terms of the biggest one, I still think it's Alabama A&M in terms of what Jimbo can do with Saban. I always feel like we always talk a lot about Saban and his assistants, but for some reason I feel like the one against Jimbo means just a little bit more. I don't know why. I don't know if that's because he beat him that one night, that with the big field goal that one time in College Station, what it may be, but I think this we always talk about, and maybe it started, and I'm sure a lot of our followers saw that, Money Manziel documentary. That was a magical game when Johnny Manziel went in there in the first year of A&M and beat Alabama in their house. And I feel like since then, and this has kind of always been a game that we circle on our calendars. And so, I would say those 2 games for sure. I think for different reasons though. Mizzou, LSU, I feel like Missouri is really coming into their own. Maybe they're playing the best football they have under Drink. LSU's got some question marks, but Alabama, A&M, man, that's it's a game we kind of circle every year. But coming off, I'm telling you, I think A&M had their best complete team performance this past year. So I'm looking forward to see what they can do.
Now, we had not done any pre-show comparing of notes on this, and so we're just being honest with the audience. I find your answer on LSU and Missouri to be interesting because, Gavin, here are odds makers and certain computers that are like and what they think of the game. Okay, we start over on one end. SP Plus has Missouri as a 1-point favorite, almost 1.5-point favorite on a neutral field. Put that in Columbia, it becomes Missouri by 4.
Wow.
Then you go over to Jeff Sagarin. who's got LSU by 4. Then you go to Vegas, which last I checked has LSU by 6.5.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Then
seeing
you go
too.
to ESPN's FPI, which has LSU by 7. Then you go to T-Rank, which I've started using. I've kind of used that one in the past. It's teamrankings.com, and they've got some pretty interesting stuff. They knock out all the games involving FCS teams to throw out some of the trash. They've got LSU by 10 in this one.
Wow.
That is a span of 14 points.
Yeah.
If you consider Missouri a 4-point favorite and LSU a 10-point favorite, and we're halfway through the season almost.
Yeah.
And this isn't like South Dakota State or somebody. These are teams that play real teams. It is amazing the disparity of opinion on this game.
Especially, I feel like you can see that maybe earlier in the year because you don't know much about teams. We got 5 games on both these teams, and it's a little confusing as well. And that's why when you initially asked me, Chris, you said you put me on the spot. My first answer was going to be Alabama A&M. But when I really thought about a toss-up, which is the word you used, I think we can all agree that this is the game. If there's a 14-point span and a spread in week 6, that's just people showing their hands that they truly have no idea what's going to happen. And I know I have no idea what's going to happen either. Missouri might come out there and look, Brady Cook has been outstanding. He was outstanding against Vanderbilt last week. Threw for career high in yards. Luther Burden's their playmaker on offense. They're explosive. Their defense is still as stout as it was last year. Like I said, this is as well as Missouri's played under Drink. And maybe they're catching LSU at a really vulnerable time. 2 losses early in the year, a conference loss now to Ole Miss, some real question marks on the defensive side of the ball. Who knows? The stars may be aligned for Missouri. The stars may be aligned for Missouri and Como this weekend, but that's why we play the games. And Brady Cook can take care of the ball and still be explosive and expose that LSU defense where we've seen it be, maybe a big win for them.
Well, and I like stats. I like using those things. I think sometimes they filter out the things that in our minds we dismiss as meaningless for whatever reason. You see entire fan bases have glaring problems in front of them and go, hey, well, we won the game or we did this or we'll get better. And when those things pop up week to week, a lot of times the computers pick up on those things, right? And that's why I find them meaningful.
Yeah.
But also watch football. And I think that sometimes we don't see a lot of good on good games, right?
Yeah.
And so you can build up a lot of your stats by crushing Kent State or somebody. When I watch these teams play football against quality football teams, I see a Missouri team that I think can expose LSU where it is really struggling right now. But on the other hand, I also see a Missouri team that is coming into a game with pressure that it has not had in some time. I also see an LSU team that I feel like was in this spot a year ago and ended up having a really nice year winning the West. Now, the difference is LSU has the burden of expectations this year, whereas it didn't last year. And sometimes when teams are thinking, hey, national title, playoffs, whatever, and things start to go off the table and kids start to get messages from other schools about, hey, come play here. You've been in that league, you know what that's like.
Real. Very real. Very real.
This is the point to where I think a lot of those things take over for good or bad. And so I'm just fascinated to see just from what I think Missouri can exploit with LSU and how much does LSU want to be in this spot after a start that's probably taken some things off the table or close to it. And to me, this is sort of a throw out the stats game and go with your eyes approach on this one to me.
Yeah. Well, I think, Chris, that was great. I think a lot of what you said, there's some really deeper stuff that maybe I can touch on about what happens in a locker room, especially for LSU, like you said, last year as well, they didn't start off the way they wanted to, but dang, they finished it playing in Atlanta and all these kind of things. The only problem is now when you start that season with such high expectations and, 5 weeks in, it looks like that those expectations are out of reach. You got to be really careful and your culture really starts to show, your true colors come out. And so, in that locker room right now, I guarantee you after that Ole Miss game, people are frustrated. People could see, their expectations and their dreams and vision for what the season was, as players on that LSU team, it's starting to look a little distant now. And if that festers in a locker room, man, it can explode. It can explode. But that's all about player leadership. It's all about coaching culture. And so we'll find out a lot about, how truly, of a good grip Brian Kelly has on this team, I think this weekend in Como, because, with Missouri, they're riding high, like I said, playing probably the best they have under Drinkwitz, and you're catching LSU at a really vulnerable time physically, because they're 3-2 and just got beat, but also maybe mentally and spiritually as in this team, and the belief in this team, and all that stuff is huge. I've said so many times over the years, college football is all about momentum. There was many times during my career where, we played a team, week 4 and they would beat us, but then, they end the year poorly. And if we'd have played them week 9 or week 10, we probably would have had a shot to beat them, and we probably would have. And vice versa. And so college football is all about momentum. When you play a team, what's their last week look like? Are they looking ahead? What's the next week look like? All that stuff is important. And so, we'll really find out. LSU may come out, as we've seen in some of our comments here, with backs against the wall and come out slaughtering, and Mizzou may come out and want to step on their throat early. But, at the same time, I agree with our man, our Andrew Cooper here is, LSU has played better teams than Missouri so far. They have. LSU's played better teams than Missouri. The only I would even say good team that Missouri's played so far is Kansas State, and they took a delay of game and had to make a 61-yard field goal to win it. But that's, in the past, another story. And so, it's a toss-up, man. It's a total toss-up, a 14-point swing in the spread. You never see that, especially in week 6 in the middle of the season. But I'm really interested to see how LSU comes out. If they come out, I think we'll know early too, Chris. I think we'll know early. If they come out and they look lackadaisical and they look like they're not in it to win it, and that energy, that stadium is charged, and it will be. That thing will be charged up, knowing what's on the stake, what's at stake there for Missouri. Because if Missouri can find a way to win that game, man, and who knows with the way that Kentucky and Georgia have been playing recently, Missouri plays Kentucky the next week. That could be a monstrous, an Atlanta type game, man.
Yes.
Seriously. And so, all this stuff, and it's the journey of the season, man. It's the journey of the season, and 1 week can make or break you. And so it'll be really interesting to see what happens in Columbia, Missouri. That place is a fun place to play, one of the more underrated places in the SEC, especially when it gets really going. And I expect it to be fully that this weekend.
All right, Andrew, let me clarify here. I was not talking about Missouri having played weak teams. I'm just saying a lot at this point in the season, last week started to even out a little bit. Like, for instance, you had Auburn first 3 weeks, UMass at Cal, Sanford. That might not be the best one because Cal's in there. Kentucky would be a better one. Ball State, EKU, Akron, Vandy, its first 4 weeks. How much do stats against those teams mean when you're playing those teams? How does that translate to playing Georgia, for example?
Right.
That's the point I was making. Missouri actually had played more decent teams than some of the other, but the point was that I'm going really more by what I've seen from Missouri than computers that still say LSU's, for the most part, a touchdown favorite. I look at the matchups and all the other things, and to me, that's why I'm bullish on Missouri. But I want to switch to another game here.
Yep.
A&M and Alabama, as you mentioned earlier, is going to be a fascinating game.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. This is one where, and talk about computers being all over the place, some computers still have Alabama as the best team in the country. One or two, I've seen that 1 or 2 places, and I don't buy it at this point, but it's interesting to me. No coach has come off a run like Nick Saban is in the middle of. Alabama's got an identity. You saw them just go run, 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 run. And when they threw it, they were very effective in throwing it. And I think Jalen Milroe's passer rating is pretty good in terms of efficiency at this point, too, for whatever that's worth. And again, I'm not sure how much it's worth, but this to me is a fascinating clash of styles because you've got Alabama's really struggled to pass protect. A&M has made an insane number of disruptive defensive plays and getting to the quarterback the last 2 weekends. I just think this is going to be a phenomenal matchup in all facets of it.
No, I think it is too. And let's really try to break down these two teams here, because when you talk about Alabama, man, they opened the season and they didn't know who they were. They didn't know what they were, especially on offense. And I think now, and like you said, Chris, you've seen Milroe maybe come into his own a little bit, throw the ball better. I don't think that's because he's become necessarily that much better of a passer in as many weeks. I think it's exactly what we said of, Tommy Rees has shortened the menu for him. They're now playing more to his skill set. than Bryce Young's or Tua or whoever, Mac Jones. He's not that player. He's different. And I think it took them a bit, and sadly a loss against Texas to really realize that. And now they're starting to come to their own, find an identity, and getting back to playing that Nick Saban style of football. And then you look at A&M, and I feel like when we talk about A&M and Jimbo, it's just like such a roller coaster ride, because they come in. We talked about having these high expectations, and they were my wild card team coming into the year. I was like, they're either going to be a dominant force, or we're never going to know. And then with that early loss to Miami, it was like, oh, I guess it's going to be the latter of an average team. We'll figure it out. Okay, well, I watched every single snap of that Arkansas A&M game last week, and I could not be more impressed with their performance. A backup quarterback coming in. We talked about it. Look, he's probably the best backup quarterback in the SEC. He's thrown for however many touchdowns and way less interceptions. And, he came in and they didn't look like they missed a beat. If anything, they kind of looked to tick up, to be honest with you. And Chris, you and I talked about that. What happens if Max Johnson comes in and is blows out the water and is playing really well throughout the rest of the year? What does that mean for Connor Wegman's future? But that's a story for down the line. But defensively, man, they got to KJ Jefferson every play. If it wasn't a sack, it was a knockdown. If it wasn't, a knockdown or a sack, it was, at least having him feel some pressure. Interceptions, pick six, special teams touchdowns, defensive touchdowns. Man, they were a complete team on Saturday against Arkansas. And, now they go home. They have some momentum, as I said, what college football is all about, against, Nick Saban and Alabama. And we all know what Kyle Field can bring when it's at a 10 out of 10 level. And that's what it's going to be on Saturday. And so, it's interesting that they're catching each other at this point in the year. I think that maybe if, we still had questions. I don't think we have as many question marks about Alabama as we used to. Look, maybe they're not the same elite team as we've seen in the past, but they're not this dysfunctional team that we saw against USF. That was just super alarming. They've come a long way in the 2-3 weeks since then. And then A&M now is finally playing, at a high level on all three phases of the ball, especially with some, elite quarterback play. If they can keep that up, man, it could be another special night in College Station.
This just occurred to me. The most similar team in terms of style and results to Alabama right now, maybe not results because they play different levels of schedules, is Auburn. Yeah. Because Auburn wants to run the ball. Auburn's got some dudes who can run the ball. Now, I think that Auburn's deficiencies in the passing game outstrip Alabama's, but both have had trouble. The quarterback position has been under a microscope a good bit of the time. Mm-hmm. And so now, and I think Alabama's got better receivers and some other things around it too, which, more than Auburn does. But the point I'm making is we saw this matchup 2 weekends ago where Texas A&M played Auburn, and that was in College Station. Yeah. Auburn ended up getting, 200 total yards in that game, 9 of 23 passing, 144 yards rushing on 41 attempts. If you take sacks out of it, I'm not sure what that was, but that's interesting to me because I think, again, that they are different. I think Alabama's a better team than Auburn. Yeah. But in terms of offensive makeup and struggles, we saw the Aggies play a team kind of like this a couple of weeks ago, and the result was 27-10 A&M.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about, if we're going to dive into this about where, Auburn and Alabama sit and how they're similar or different, I think that both the strengths of their offenses are running the football. I actually think that, especially watching this game last week against Georgia, Hugh Freeze has found this, I don't know how he's figured it out, but this balance of switching two quarterbacks and it was effective. And whether it's, gap scheme, quarterback runs and on the left side or zone read stuff with Ashford in the game. He's a tough runner, man. He had some tough runs against Georgia, finishing through the goal line, through contact. There was a couple times in that Georgia game where I was like, are they going to get beat? Is Auburn going to beat them? Like, there were some serious times, and we've had that in the past. I remember the Missouri game last year, Georgia against Missouri, a couple other scares as well, maybe South Carolina this year, but maybe more than ever, I was like, man, is Georgia going to get beat in this game? And that's because the way, Auburn was running the football. At the same time, Auburn is just they are incompetent at throwing the football. They can't throw the football. Alabama can. That's the difference. And so, the way they do it with Milroe, whether it is really spreading out the field and making the defense put a spy on him, which takes another guy out of coverage, is that a part of their process and their formula to win? Is it getting him outside the pocket? sprint outs that give him also an option to run if he doesn't like the throw on the run. And so it's stuff like that Tommy Rees and Saban and all those guys can put together for Milroe. But that's the difference between Alabama and Auburn right now is Auburn can't throw the ball. And I know that everyone who plays them knows that. And that's why you're seeing stacked boxes. That's why you're seeing safety sitting at 9 yards. No one's worried about getting beat over the top versus Auburn. That can still happen with Milroe. As a matter of fact, that's his best ball, is his deep ball, whether it's post or a go. And so that's the biggest difference between the two teams. But for sure, the biggest strength of both of them is running the football, especially with the quarterback.
Yeah, and he did hit that deep ball against Texas, which is a good segue because, and I can't remember, I think it was Saturday Down South that said this. It might have been my buddy Michael Bratton over at that SEC podcast. So whoever deserves the credit there, take it. I respect both those places. But they said, if you want to make a good parallel to A&M's offense, it's Texas.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because and a lot of it's because of that receiving core. A&M's is one of the better ones around. I don't know Max Johnson, Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, I think.
But I mean Johnson is proven to be plenty good so far.
Oh, yeah.
And again, we've seen how that matchup went on the other side.
Yeah, I think that. I don't disagree with that comparison. I do think that Texas is way more creative, way more versatile in their offense with what Sark's able to do. Is seriously, I'm not kidding. I've looked a lot of PowerPoint slides. I think Steve Sarkisian is the best offensive mind I've seen in college football, maybe ever. And look, you can talk Lincoln Riley, you can talk, other guys, but when we were preparing for Alabama and other teams, and we were watching Texas on offense. So, for example, as an offensive player, I was watching Alabama's defense, and so watching last year's Texas-Alabama game, the stuff they're able to do with motions and running the same play 5 times in 2 drives, but out of 5 different formations. I mean, that totally just messes with the minds of the defensive players for sure, but also the coaches up in the box, and what you're able to do. And basically, what Sark has been able to do at Texas is he can run any play he wants. He just dresses it up differently, and that's how he wins. That's how he wins. That's how he scores points. A&M, in terms of talent level, is right up there with Texas now, especially at the quarterback position. They're playing better with Max Johnson. Look, I'm not saying he's Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers is probably a better quarterback than him, but the skill at receiver, the line up front, able to protect. There's guys just all over the place, and that's what makes the quarterback's job so easy when you're playing this offense. Just get the ball out to those guys and make them look good for you. You throw a 5-yard swing pass and he takes it for 75. That's a 75-yard passing touchdown, baby. That's a quarterback's dream right there. And so, that's what you get in these offenses is playmakers who are able to. You just got to get it in their hands. And look, I'm not saying you got to be a game manager. You still got to be able to fit the ball in tight windows and read defenses and whatnot. But in terms of the skill level of offensive players, I actually do agree with you, Chris. I think the closest comparison is Texas, and we all saw how that played out. With the game in Tuscaloosa earlier this year.
Well, I'm looking at the stat sheet. I'm just kind of realizing how deep A&M is. I mean, you got Evan Stewart and Anaya Smith who've kind of gotten the highlights, but you got Noah Thomas still out there. You got Moose Muhammad way down the list of their receiving chart this year. He was a guy that was a starter a year ago. In the backfield, I think Moss was a kid that had a good game for them last week. They got Amari Daniels. Reuben Owens is a guy we talked up all off season. I mean, these dudes have got parts and depth, and that's important off the jump, but it's also important when you start getting guys hurt, which is something you're starting to see at some places too.
Well, let's look. I mean, just think about that, Chris. You just named like 7 A&M skill players, and like that doesn't happen at every school. Usually, we're talking about maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 guys. I mean, you just named 7 guys off the top of your head, and you know what Jimbo's done, and I got to give him credit for this. And of all we poke fun and this and that about whatever with Jimbo is. He's now been able to stack talent and create a culture of true competition. And that's what Kirby did, especially on the defensive side of the ball at Georgia. You're getting stacked classes now of 5 stars on 5 stars on 5 stars. And these freshmen who can come in and are immediately better than juniors who've been in your program for 2 and 3 years. And that's rare at other schools. And Kirby was able to do it at Georgia. And now we're seeing it here. And, we speak specifically about Anaya Smith. I was reading in Sports Illustrated article today about Anaya Smith, and his brother played for Nick Saban in Alabama. I don't know if people remember this, but he also wanted to transfer to Georgia. It kind of became this whole public ordeal. Nick Saban speaking out against it. And so he talks about how this game is a little bit more personal for him. Ainias Smith in this game, we saw last week how explosive he is on special teams. It'd be interesting to see if Alabama keeps it away from him on punts and whatnot. But, I think for Jimbo, it's personal. Obviously, for Ainias Smith, it's personal, as I just described. This game, as I said earlier, we circle it for some reason. I don't know if it was, the magic of Johnny Football a decade ago, if it was the crazy game with the game-winning field goal, years ago at Kyle Field. But this game's always interesting, and I think it means a little more to Nick Saban that he's playing his assistant Jimbo Fisher than maybe some other assistants.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on A&M Alabama? Because I wanted to ask you about Kentucky Georgia in a minute too. I know you're going to have some thoughts on Ray Davis and that performance this weekend.
Yeah. I think just to wrap up this A&M Alabama talk is, it's going to be Alabama's obviously going into a hostile environment. It's going to be raucous. It's going to be loud. I think if A&M can find a way to win this game, that people are going to forget about that Miami early loss real quick in College Station. It means more. We talk about the SEC meaning more. This game means more to people in College Station. It's dethroning Nick Saban. It's Jimbo getting the best of them, and now they're firing on all cylinders. So I'm excited to see if they can do it. At the same time, I think this is going to be a great litmus test to see if Alabama, as you said, there's a lot of computers out there that still have them as one of the favorites to win the national championship. I don't think that's totally out of line, but if they can find a way to win this game, maybe that becomes more of a realistic thing.
All right, before we talk Kentucky, Georgia, I know you're going to have some thoughts on Ray Davis because you played with him a year ago.
Yeah, that's my boy.
A quick shout to our sponsor, CHOMPS. It is the perfect go-to snack after a workout, halftime, podcast, whatever. 9 flavors of CHOMPS, so something for everybody. Go with the trial pack. Get 6 different flavors and all 3 proteins. It's got 9 to 10 grams of protein and 60 to 100 calories per stick. Gluten-free, free of allergens. Good for you, good for your kids, and it tastes good too. Go check out CHOMPS. You can see the promo code. Get 15% off your order and help the folks who help our show. Okay, I want to ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about Ray Davis preseason. He's a friend of yours. You know him. You guys keep in touch a little bit. I'm not going to ask you to divulge into conversations here, but you know the guy well, and you know what he can do. Did you know Ray Davis had this explosive gear in him that we have seen?
Oh yeah. And I saw it first. His first year at Vanderbilt was Clark Lee's first year, which I guess was 2021. So he was at Vandy for 2 years. And there was a play he made versus Stanford in week 3 where it was almost like, if people remember, and this is for some real deal college football fans here, but about, 5-6 years ago, Ohio State opened the season at Virginia Tech, and it was this whole ordeal of like they just come off to win. Who was going to play at quarterback? Was it going to be JT Barrett? Do you guys remember that? It was going to be JT Barrett. It was going to be Cardale Jones. Braxton Miller was still on the roster. And Braxton Miller made a play in the middle of the field in the game, like a full speed spin move, and it made my jaw hit the floor. And Ray Davis did that against Stanford in 2021. And at that point, I knew, okay, this kid is special. He's twitchy. He's different. His vision is what makes him elite. And I think that's something that's harder to see as a fan, because when you're watching on the TV copies, you're seeing it from, a horizontal point of view. You're not seeing any of the holes up front. You're just kind of seeing the guy pop out. When you watch him from the end zone views, or the butt views, as we call it, his vision before he gets the ball, after he gets the ball, of reading, obviously there's a play call. Is it A to B gap? Is it A to C? Are you following the butt of the guard on the pull, or whatever it may be? Ray's vision is the best I've seen. And then once he sees it, he hits it with no doubt. And that's what you saw in the big run against Florida. He's tough as nails. You saw that in the touchdown run on the swing pass from 10 yards where he broke like 4 tackles in 6 yards. He's tough as nails. He's explosive, but his vision is what makes him elite. And he's a great dude, man. I can't say enough about Ray. Selfishly, I wish he was still in the black and gold, obviously, being my alma mater, but he's an awesome dude. Is always giving credit to, his teammates and his offensive line. I saw that. And, we talked after the game and just wish him nothing but the best. But, an elite player in this conference and maybe now after this weekend, maybe in the country.
That said, different challenge this week. I know Florida's got some talent up front, and Georgia does too. It may not be vintage Georgia from 2021 yet, but they've always got 5 stars. Maybe not some of the names they had coming back in terms of guys that have made plays year in and year out. And we've seen Georgia do this too, Gavin. They sort of flip it on and off when you're when you're used to playing for national titles and being in the playoffs and steamrolling anything in your path at the snap of a finger, we have seen Georgia not do that sometimes. Kent State last year, some games this year. So I don't know what to make of Georgia yet. I don't think it's as good a Georgia team as we've seen. And look, let's be honest too, that was Kentucky's first real test, and that was at home.
Yeah.
This one is in Athens. I have a feeling Georgia's best football is in front of it.
Yeah, and we say, like, it's exactly what you just said, Chris. Like, Kentucky's first real test was Florida at home. Okay, but Florida and Georgia are different animals. And look, at the same time, Kirby Smart said it himself, and whether it's, behind the scenes footage that we've seen as SEC fans, but one of his mantras or Kirbyisms is you're either elite or you're not. Well, let's keep it real. Georgia has not been elite this year. They haven't. They haven't been. Offensively, they haven't looked nearly as in sync. Defensively, look, they can bring it when they need to, but still, I've seen, like we talked about, Auburn doesn't have a passing game. They were able to score points on them early. I believe they were up 10-0. Is that right, Chris? I think they were up 10-0 early in the game. And so, I think going into this game, I don't know if Georgia like turns it on, turns it off, or plays down to the level of their competition, whatever it is. Look, they don't ask how. It's either a win or a loss in college football. They don't ask how, but I would really like to see Georgia hit that gear that we've seen them play over the past I would maybe even say 3 years. And so, is that this weekend, and how do they shut down Ray Davis? I think that Kentucky's got to be a little more versatile with him, because Georgia's so good at plugging the run, being gap sound. Is there a way that you can get, Ray more involved other than handoff right, handoff left? Is it swing passes? Is it screens? Is it, trying to take cover 4, safeties and cover 2 safeties and push them to the sideline and maybe run Ray up the middle on a seam? I think that Kentucky's going to have to be more creative with him than they were with Florida, in terms of handoff right, handoff left, and just kind of let him be Ray, because I think Georgia's defense is that much better. And so, look, I think there's a lot of storylines in this game. I think, if Kentucky finds a way to win this game, obviously it's going to shake the college football landscape. It's also going to put Kentucky in territory that they have never been, under, Stoops and what they're able to do. And that's a big win on the road against the number 1 team in the country at night. I mean, these are ginormous factors. But we'll see. It'll be an interesting game. I need to see Georgia hit another level. I've been disappointed. Yeah. Look, they're the number 1 team in the country, and maybe they should be. But I think we may be giving them we may be giving this Georgia team a little too much credit of the teams of the past. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, because I want to see them play well, and I like watching Georgia play. But some interesting things this weekend for sure.
Our friend Blaine Gilmer brought up a good point. Blaine also does a ton of content on our channel. As most of you guys know, it's the quarterback running position, or maybe teams with running quarterbacks, that have given Georgia more of a problem. Again, we're early in the season, and Georgia's opponents have also included UT Martin, Ball State, UAB. So not going to be a strong schedule to begin with for the Bulldogs. We hit that ad nauseum throughout the offseason and the tougher part to come. But it's a little different. Devin Leary is not the 2 guys, and Thorne and Ashford that Auburn's got. Thorne, both those guys have had 100-yard rushing games in their careers. Just the dynamic of having that as a threat, even if you don't use it, is different. So I think that's good to know.
Yeah, I think it's good to know for sure. At the same time, if Devin Leary turns the ball over like he has for the majority of the season, Kentucky doesn't have a shot. And so, whether it's interceptions, sack fumbles, whatever it is, you cannot win these games. The margin for error against these teams is so small. And when I say that specifically, I mean turnovers, I mean capitalizing on opportunities, whether it's, your defense getting a turnover in the red zone and you're set up for success. Like, those are huge things that you look back on, after a loss or, a tough game, and you say, man, that was the difference in the game right there. And the thing that sucks is you don't realize it until after it happens. And so you have to play so well. The margin for error is so small, but look, you're right. I think Devin Leary is a better quarterback than Georgia's defense has seen really all year. At the same time, if he turns the ball over at the rate that we've seen, for the majority of the season, I don't think Kentucky has a shot to win this game.
I got 2 stats of interest for you. Quickly, a shout out to one of our sponsors, Andy Ludicky and MyPerfectFranchise.net. What Andy does, spends time with you. They match you to potential clients. They sit there, get an inventory of your skills, what you do, what you want to do with your life, how much time you want to spend with your family. And they have got working relationships with all kinds of franchises. And they will sit down and go through a very extensive vetting and matching process to try to find out where can we give you an opportunity and plug you in with a franchise that's going to get you where you want to go in life. They do not charge you for the consultation. They do not try to steer you to a particular franchise because they get more over here than they get over there. It's not how this works. They're just hardworking guys looking to do great work and put you and your family in the right spot and match you with the franchise where you're a good match. Go visit myperfectfranchise.net. Andy Ludicky is a friend of mine. He owns that company. Tell him you heard about it at Southeastern 14. He has helped I don't even know how many people, and he can help you too. All right, Gavin, some stuff I looked up this morning. This is interesting, and again, some of it's schedule-based, but Kentucky and Georgia, and I think it's not in that order, the number 1 and number 2 teams in the league in terms of scoring margin in the SEC. So that's interesting. I think Kentucky is the only team in the top 10 in the country, which usually you see 3 or 4 SEC teams up there. Not the case this year, as this league has not been as dominant. But Kentucky also the top rushing team in the conference in efficiencies. Take sacks out of it. Kentucky's averaging nearly 7 yards a carry. Georgia's given up 4.9. And again, our friend Blaine pointed out that a lot of that is the quarterback running position. But also, again, Georgia has not played all comers so far. There's a little bit there in the stats that indicate maybe Kentucky's got a chance to get some traction there in the run game.
Yeah. Oh, I think they definitely have a chance. They have more than a chance. I just think that they are going to have to be, because Kirby's looking at this game. It's Tuesday. They're already at Tuesday practice now, but Sunday and yesterday he was looking at the film, and his main thing was, how do I stop number 1? How do I stop Ray Davis? And the first thing is he's not going to let him do the standard zone and gap scheme left and right. Kentucky's going to have to, whether it's Liam Cohen or whatever it is with Ray and Devin Leary, they're going to have to find ways to use him more versatily. I'm not saying the run game is going to work. I just think in order to create those explosive plays that they kind of found against these teams who are lesser competition than the University of Georgia, they're going to have to be more creative with getting the ball to Ray. The great news is they're keying, like I said, Kirby going in this game, especially watching what Ray did against Florida. He's not going to let Ray beat him. The great news is he's got guys like Barry Brown and Dane Key where you can go play action over the top, and that may be the big difference in this game. You get a nice play action to Ray, and you all week Georgia safeties and corners and linebackers are hearing, man, we're not going to let him beat us. And you get sucked down in play action. Barry Brown's a ginormous playmaker in this conference. I mean, was an unbelievable player as a freshman in this league. Dane Key, I've said multiple times, is one of the most underrated receivers, possession guys in the SEC. So he's got playmakers across the board. Can they find ways to get behind the Georgia defense through play action or whatever it may be? It's going to have to be more of a team effort. Ray basically won the game by himself last week. Yeah, it's going to need more of a team effort offensively from Kentucky. But I really think with the way Kentucky's looked explosively, with the way that Georgia has looked, not living up to the standard of what we thought they were, I think Kentucky has more than a chance to win this game. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, I'll give my picks later on this week on Friday, but I think they do have more than a chance to win this game.
All right, Gavin, we've kind of made this Take It Forward Tuesday, which is take things we've seen the last week or two, assign meaning or no meaning to them, and decide how they affect things going forward. We hadn't talked Ole Miss yet. Ole Miss had one of the most impressive performances anybody in the league this weekend, 706 yards. Jackson Dart shared co-player of the week with Ray Davis, but I think bigger than that, Ole Miss finally got Quinshon Judkins going again, which has not really happened all season.
Yep.
I think that's big. I think Ole Miss, and this I've been told, I didn't know this, I think Ole Miss had maybe changed some blocking schemes and things, and it's maybe taken longer to get that going. But Ole Miss is downright freaking scary.
Yeah.
If Judkins keeps running the way he did Saturday, which is a lot like the way he ran a year ago. They're getting guys healthier. They got Harris back. I feel like we go back and look, and maybe this comes full circle to where we went earlier in the show. Maybe last week was more about how good Alabama's defense is becoming than
Yeah.
whatever we could find fault with Ole Miss in that offense.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think with Ole Miss, we've talked about this at length in the past. I think now more than ever, Dart and Kiffin are on the same page. And I talked about how dangerous that can be when you have an offensive guru, an offensive-minded coach, basically implanting his brain and everything he thinks in a quarterback who's on the field making this decision on the play to play. And we talked about how they seem to be as in sync as they've ever been. What's this offense going to look like when Judkins gets going? Now we finally saw it, and it's scary, as you said. It's dangerous. At the same time, I think maybe that this past weekend was just as much exposing LSU's defense as it was Ole Miss's offense being as good as they are. But that I could not be more impressed with the performance. The environment was awesome. I loved watching that game. Ole Miss's defense, the hits they were able to put on Jaden Daniels, I mean, monstrous, game-changing, like the hits that you see where the crowd goes, ooh, like those are the big ones, right? And so huge plays in the game from the defense as well. And I wondered how they would turn around after maybe, one of the more emotional, draining losses at Alabama with a ginormous opportunity. They squandered that. How do they respond? And they were better than I could have imagined. And so got to give my props there to them. But, as we say, that the SEC season, it's a war. It's going to be a war, and the margin for error this year is smaller than ever. And it's wide open. It's wide open. There's no elite team in this conference right now. And so who knows? Maybe we'll see a team, sneak in and win a game in Atlanta who maybe lost one, possibly two, during the regular season, although that may be tough. But, we'll see, man. There's a lot of good teams in this conference, but Ole Miss maybe more than anybody impressed me this past weekend. We'll see how they can roll the rest of the year with that momentum.
Okay, let's finish here. We haven't really looked ahead a lot to Vanderbilt, Florida yet. Haven't done the preview on our channel, which we will do. But some interesting things happened.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Florida very disappointed. Florida plays much differently at home than it does on the road.
Indeed.
And this game is in Gainesville. Vanderbilt has made a quarterback change. Vanderbilt's issues the last month have been revolving around turnovers. Vanderbilt was just giving the ball away and giving touchdowns out like they were Halloween candy. Vanderbilt went to Ken Seals, and that came to an end. They did throw a pick in their own end zone. So that one, for a change, they didn't give somebody the ball on that side of the 20. And Missouri's defense won the day for the most part there. Yeah. But I think Vanderbilt found a little something with Ken Seals that it's going to maybe tap into going forward. I expect he will be the starter against Florida. Mm-hmm. What do you make of this one Saturday based on what you saw of both teams last week?
Well, let's start with Vandy because, obviously I've watched them a lot this year, being my alma mater, and what I've seen from them is they're just missing something on offense. I don't know if it's a spark. I don't know if it's a presence or a leadership, whatever it was. They lost, two team captains or really three, and myself and Ben Bresnahan, a fellow tight end, and Mike Wright to Mississippi State. And so, there's obviously, different holes and talent to fill in that offense, but there was also some huge, leadership roles and identity people. And I think that's the story of Vandy's season so far, Chris. You can probably agree with that, watching them as well, is they just look kind of lifeless on offense. And so, make a change, and Ken comes in, and a guy who's unbelievably respected. If you guys haven't seen, he had a post-game about a 90-second answer to a question was asked about just his journey. And the kid is just lights out. And I can't say enough about him. The guys respect him. That's so important in a college football locker room. And now we just got to see it on the field. They just got to go produce it on the field and not turn the ball over. And, Ken loves taking the deep shot. We saw that. There was many explosive touchdowns that we haven't seen the rest of the year, over the top behind the safeties. And they need to see if they can keep that going. In terms of Florida, just the most up and down season ever. They start out against Utah. Everybody counts them out. They come back, win an emotional big game on the national stage at home against Tennessee. We're high on Florida, and then they go and get their tails kicked in Lexington. So, as you said, they're different teams. They're a different team on the road versus at home. They go home. Vandy beat Florida last year in Nashville. I guarantee you, they're not forgetting about that. And so, how does that play into this year? In Gainesville, what does their running game look like? Is that the strength of their offense? Graham Mertz still be that game manager of not turning the ball over? Can Vandy force ways? And so, I think this is going to be like, this is a game that I think Vandy expects to win because they won it last year. They need it. They're desperate for a win for sure. This is also a game that Florida cannot under circumstances afford to lose. And so, two desperate teams, and usually that makes for a good game. So I'm looking forward to watching that one.
And we talked about this in another situation earlier in the podcast. And I know Anthony Richardson was kind of raw, and some weeks it worked and some weeks it didn't.
Yeah.
But he was such a threat. I mean, he could make a play either throwing a big ball downfield or with his feet.
Yep.
You just don't see many physical freaks like you see of Anthony Richardson. And Mertz last week, 25 of 30, I think 244, threw the ball pretty well. And some of that's, look, they didn't run the ball as much, but that's game flow. Kentucky got on them from the jump and didn't really let up. But you look, Florida has not really played to the identity that I think we thought Florida would play to. We thought, Mertz and Pearsall, okay, that's a nice combination, but their bread was really going to be buttered more with Etienne and Montrell Johnson. And we saw that against Tennessee, that they jumped. And again, that was another game flow situation where they got out to an early lead. Etienne had an early touchdown run, and that set the flow of the game. Tennessee was on its heels the whole time. That played to Florida's strength. Last week, they go to Lexington. The script gets flipped. So did the result. But this offense has just been very pedestrian for the most part. I mean, again, other than that Tennessee game, they score 11 points against Utah, throw McNeese out of it, that they beat Charlotte 22-7, and then 33-14 against Kentucky. It just feels like Florida's identity was supposed to be those two running backs. That's what we thought it would be.
Yep.
Graham Mertz has been fine. Ricky Pearsall had maybe the catch of the year, and he's coming off a nice season, but it just feels like they cannot consistently tap into probably what they wanted to be. And I don't know exactly what you attribute that to. Again, some of it's game flow, but the rest I really don't know.
Yeah, and I think, there's a lot of times, especially with offenses, where you can watch, and I've noticed this maybe more than others just because I was in a lot of these offenses and also was able to see, from the other sideline, opposing offenses when they get this way as well. There's sometimes where you can feel where everyone's kind of just waiting for someone to make a play. And I feel like that's what's happening with Florida right now because, I just think they really struggle to methodically go down the field and put together, like 10 plays, 75-yard drive. They're waiting for someone to make a big explosive play that leads to like an explosive touchdown or something like that. And look, I get it. And that's great. You want to lean on your better players. It is the two backs, but I mean, if eventually the spark runs out, man, like sometimes it doesn't happen. The big plays are exciting for a reason because they don't happen that often. And so you can't lean on them, as a part of your identity as your offense. It has to be way deeper than that. And I think Florida has an issue there, offensively. Defensively, Florida's always going to be fast. They're always going to be long up front. But man, I just what you said right there, Chris, really made me think of that. Is there's that flow offensively where you're just kind of out there and you're waiting for someone to do something instead of you going and making it, whether it's, the play or the block or a combo block or a catch or a route or whatever it may be, you're just kind of waiting for someone to make something happen. Like instead of just waiting for someone, you go do it. And I feel like that's where Florida is offensively right now.
Well, and here's another thing, and I think we'll probably close here. One reason Kentucky's been so good this year is opportunities. Two pick sixes against Vandy a couple of weeks ago, some short fields and some other games. I think they had a fumble return in one of those out-of-conference games a couple of weeks ago. Gavin, Florida's forced one turnover all year. The offense per play hasn't been awful, 6.1 yards per play. That's not great, but look, Arkansas is sitting here averaging 5.3 per play. Let me give you Alabama 5.8. I mean, it's not great, but you got some named teams here that are worse than that. And we've talked about Florida's schedule has been one of the more challenging ones in the league. But when you're not operating from a big margin there, and I really don't think they are. I think Florida is solid. I don't think Florida's awful, but Florida doesn't really scare me anywhere.
Yeah.
And on top of that, when you've had one turnover all year, you don't have an opportunity. Now, and I think that maybe that one that came against Tennessee, but they are not creating opportunities with their defense for short fields and other stuff. And I think eventually, look, that's kind of a fluke stat. It's going to flip. Maybe it flips this weekend, and Vanderbilt turns it over 4 times, which Vanderbilt has been prone to do. But that's one thing that kind of stands out when we look at Florida is those easy points have just not been there for them so far.
Yeah, they haven't been. And, like if you obviously everyone's work, and it's the most important stat is points, right? Because that's what wins you and loses you the game, obvious. But I feel like, everyone always looks at, what's the total yards or what's the rushing yards or passing yards. Man, give me the stat. Give me 2 stats. Give me turnovers and give me explosive plays. If I can see those two are going to tell me more than others, to be honest with you, who ended up winning the game. If you didn't show me the score and you gave me those 2 stats, look, I'm not going to get it every time, but I'll have a pretty high percentage of telling you who wins the game. Those are the 2 most important stats, in my opinion, in the game of football. Florida only forcing 1 all year. Look, that maybe that is a little fluky, but also too, like there's some strategy and technique to that. Punching the ball. How are we stripping when a guy's getting held up? How are we, collapsing on the ball when we're throwing out routes? We saw that last week against, Tennessee and South Carolina. Those are easy pick sixes and ones that you can jump. I need to see that more. And so something's got to give here because Vandy's been horrible at turning the ball over. Florida hasn't been great about producing turnovers. And so something's got to give here, whether, like you said, Vandy turns the ball over a bunch and it doesn't become a game, or Vandy doesn't turn the ball over at all. And we finally see, who this team truly is without, gifting these other team points and, like it's candy, as you said. So be an interesting game. Something's got to give, but I think Florida is also a different team at home than they are on the road.
Yeah, and I double-checked that to make sure that's correct because you almost can't do that by accident at this point in the season. One turnover. I mean, I think that's something – and I guess if you're a Florida fan, maybe you're a little bit encouraged by that going, hey, look, guys.
Yeah, that's fair.
We're sitting here. We hadn't – I mean, somebody can fumble a snap and give the ball to you easily. Absolutely. It just hasn't happened for them so far. All right, we're done for the day. We'll be back at it tomorrow as well as Thursday, Friday. We're going to be talking a little Arkansas later in the week, trying to nail something down with my buddy Andrew Hutchinson. Of course, we'll preview some more of these games. We've got previews up at the channel. And this time next week, we'll be starting our daily basketball show. Yeah, that's right. We're a month out from basketball season in a couple of days. So best way to get all that, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. That helps our analytics. For Gavin Schoenwald, I'm Chris Lee. This is the SEC Daily here at Southeastern 14. We appreciate you watching. We'll see you back on Wednesday at 11 Central.